Here's the exposed truth. It was beyond the Russians to do it. A sound plan, but they couldn't execute it. What are we likely to see from Vladimir Putin? Continued bullishness on he can win in the East. There are really three potential scenarios for 2026. The question is, will the West wake up before the third bell rings? They said it would be over in 3 days. I joke in all of my broadcasts that it was Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation. They said the Russian bear was unstoppable. But 4 years later, the bear is bleeding, and the shield of Europe is still standing. Welcome to The Sun's Battle Plans Exposed. I'm Philip Ingram. February the 24th, 2026. It marks exactly 4 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 1,449 days of hell. A nation of 43 million standing toe-to-toe with a nuclear superpower of 145 million. But if you think this war started 4 years ago, you're looking at the wrong map. Tonight, based on exclusive analysis from Dr. Denis Bush and Professor Tony Meehan, we're ripping up the timeline. We're going back to where it really began. We're going to show you how a 3-day operation turned into the biggest humiliation in modern military history, and why the danger to the West is higher now than ever before. To understand the battlefield of 2026, we have to look at the mistakes of 2014. Dr. Denis Bush, a leading military expert from the National University of Kyiv, calls this the first bell. Putin annexed Crimea and then seized parts of the Donbass. Putin's intelligence services actually went into the Donbass and managed to stimulate some organizations to step up and set up pseudo-governments and try and declare a level of independence. They tried to do it across the whole of Ukraine and got no support from anyone. Only in this east did they manage to generate something themselves through the Russian-speaking population that was there. It was a test, and the world failed it. As Bush notes, European leaders expressed a little concern, and they were a little nervous. They treated it as a local skirmish in Eastern Europe. The West slept, but Ukraine didn't. For 8 years, they dug in. They knew the Russian playbook. This wasn't peace, it was the prelude to the storm. Professor Tony Meehan puts it best: to understand this resistance, you have to understand the people. For centuries, Ukrainians have defended themselves against the Russians, the Tatars, the Ottoman Turks, the Germans. It's in every Ukrainian's DNA. Being Ukrainian does not make you anti-Russian, it just makes you Ukrainian. So, 24th of February 2022, this was the start of the second bell. February 2022, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, starting with special forces trying to operate in Kyiv. Special forces supported by an air mobile operation from within Belarus to capture airfields and link up with the special forces and intelligence forces who will have hopefully captured the government and ministers from Kyiv and other key individuals. That air mobile operation was going to be then reinforced with an airborne operation coming in, bringing paratroops in to further strengthen their foothold around Kyiv. And then, of course, we were going to get the link-up operation, a road too far for the Russians. It didn't work. Western intelligence stopped the Ukrainian government and government officials, and of course President Zelensky, being captured. They were ready at Homstel airfield to stop the air mobile operation. The airborne operation to link up with it, the aircraft were shot down. They didn't get in the ground. And of course, we had one of the biggest traffic jams in Europe caused by the Ukrainians attacking the Russian column as it came in. It's a very complex operation. It was beyond the Russians to do it. A sound plan, but they couldn't execute it. The complexity was shown in a slightly different way when the Americans took out Maduro from Venezuela. They executed that perfectly. A full-scale invasion supported by Belarus, the use of their territory, missiles, tanks and paratroopers, a classic conventional war that Europe thought was extinct. The world expected Kyiv to fall within 96 hours. Dr. Bush reveals that in the first month, Russia had captured 10% of Ukraine's territory. But here's the exposed truth. Investigations now suggest this initial success was largely due to the Kremlin agents that have been embedded throughout Ukraine and the Ukrainian government. Without that betrayal, Russia may not have even taken anything. But then the miracle on the Dnipro, the river that flows through a large portion of Ukraine. The second army of the world ran out of fuel, it ran out of food, and ran into a wall of Ukrainian steel. They were pushed back from Kyiv. They retreated from the north. The three-day war was over. The real war had just begun. Late 2022, the world was watching in the south of Ukraine. The reality was the Ukrainians had carried out a deception operation and were going to attack in a lightning attack into the north. The Kharkiv lightning offensive. In days, they liberated more territory than Russia had seized in months. Then, the grind in the south, around Kherson, the only regional capital that Russia had managed to capture. And by November 2022, the Russians were forced to flee back across the Dnipro River. But war evolves. The rapid maneuvers of 2022 gave way to the fortress battles of the east. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and now the relentless battles of 2026. So now let's jump to today in 2026. The frontline is jagged but calcified. Of today, 19.3% of Ukraine has been occupied by the Russians. So where do we stand on the 4th anniversary? Well, according to deep state data, again analysed by Dr. Bush, Russia controls that, as I said, 19.3% of Ukraine. That's about 116,000 square kilometres. But if you look at the cost, millions of dead, probably trillions of dollars in destruction. Bush warns that while tank battles rage in the east, a different war is happening right here in London, or in Paris, or in Washington, or in Berlin. A hybrid war. Russia is very powerful in Europe and across the rest of the world. Through propaganda, through misinformation, through corruption, through political influence, they're brainwashing Europeans and other global leaders who don't necessarily feel the threat. They're weaponizing fatigue, Ukraine fatigue that we keep hearing about. We're seeing dozens of Russian drones over NATO territory. We've seen missiles landing in Poland. And the response? Silence. The geopolitical landscape has shifted. The US is looking inward increasingly, with the talk of withdrawing from UN and potentially NATO structures, and the expiration of nuclear treaties that hasn't been widely reported across the press. The rules have changed. Ukraine is fighting not just a conventional enemy, but a global shift towards isolationism. So despite the politics, one fact remains. Ukraine now possesses the most battle-hardened modern army in Europe, and arguably in the world. 1 million soldiers. They've tested every weapon system the world has to offer in real combat. They've tested many weapon systems that didn't exist in combat. It is one of the biggest beta testing zones for new weapon systems that we have seen in recent years. Dr. Bush is clear, the army is the first defence of Europe. The warning from Kyiv is stark. If Ukraine falls, the tank treads don't stop. First the Baltics, then Poland, then Finland. Bush argues that if the US steps back, Putin will advance, maybe even to Berlin. He sees Ukraine as the first salami slice of his wider ambitions of regenerating the old Soviet Union. So if we look as to what's going to happen through 2026 and beyond, there are really three potential scenarios for 2026. continued combat, Ukrainian concessions, Russian exhaustion. Well, continual combat is going to be there. The east is not going to move. It hasn't, the front lines haven't moved dramatically in the past 4 years. They're not going to move over the next year. We'll still see the meat grinder operations that are going on there. The Russians will still think that they can win. They will not give any concessions without getting the territory that they haven't captured so far. However, we've seen the Ukrainians give as many concessions as they can. Whether they've got more concessions in their tank or not, I doubt. But we have to see what pressure comes on from the international community, from Donald Trump and others. But we're getting into a point of Russian exhaustion. And this is where the attack on the Russian oil and gas infrastructure, the attacks on Russian industry, the attacks on Russian generals inside Moscow, the attacks on Russian airfields, the attacks on billions of dollars worth of Russian military equipment is eating away at Russia's continual ability to support this conflict. It is getting to a tipping point, and that tipping point is something that is likely to come in late 2026 or early 2027. Russian exhaustion is about to come upon us, and that will be economic exhaustion, and that will be the Russian economy suddenly realizing the Russian people are in a position where they cannot continue with the suffering that they will begin to feel. As I've said in a previous episode, 425% increase in cucumber prices. As this happens, what are we likely to see from Vladimir Putin? Continued bullishness on he can win in the east. Continued bullishness in his negotiations, saying Russia is winning the whole war. Continual bullishness to the Russian people, blaming NATO for everything. But as he gets more and more concerned, we'll see him rattle the nuclear sabre more often than he has done. Something he's reached for on many occasions, but we'll likely see the rhetoric increase. Does that mean we're any closer to nuclear war? No, because Putin knows that if he ever went and pushed the nuclear button, even with what is described as a tactical nuclear weapon, then he would lose the tacit support he has from other nations around the world, from China, from India, from Iran, if Iran is in a position to continue to support, but elsewhere. And Putin knows that he cannot survive if that happens. So he can threaten nuclear, he will not go that way. It's something we look at very closely. So within all of this, I've given you a prediction as to what's likely to happen. Keep watching our episodes as we update you, and let's see whether I've been right in doing it. But I'll leave you with a thought. We're 4 years into a war that many ignored for 12. Professor Tony Meehan reminds us of the resilience of the blood of the defenders. Despite these invasions, they remain strong, determined, and independent Ukrainians. The question isn't whether Ukraine can fight. The question is, will the West wake up before the third bell rings? Because the next time the battlefield might not be in the Donbass, it might be closer to the borders of NATO. So, I'm Philip Ingram for The Sun Battle Plans Exposed. Thank you. Continue to watch, comment, like, and share this amongst your friends. And of course, I'd like to thank in particular Dr. Dennis Bush from the Military Institute of Taras, Shevchenko National University in Kyiv, and historical context provided by Professor Tony Meehan. Thank you. Goodbye.